I want to call this lecture, It's All About and We're All in It Together. Or if you prefer, There Ain't No I in Old Testament. There's something about the group that I think we sometimes fail to see in our modern world. Because in our world, we're responsible for our own actions. We're not responsible for other people's actions, and for sure our leaders don't reflect directly on us, or at least we don't feel that they do. But that's not how they felt in the Bible times. Everything in the Bible must be viewed from a communal perspective. Now, we've been talking about the Psalms. We talked about the different varieties, the different realities of the Psalm. We talked about Psalms of orientation, Psalms of disorientation, and of course, Psalms of new orientation. And an idea that I really want to emphasize is that David and all the other psalmists, not only that, all the writers in the Bible, none of them are freelancers, none of them are just winging it. By all accounts, the poets, especially of the Bible, are professionally trained psalmists and songwriters, and what we have is anything but first drafts. They are beautifully crafted. They are perfect in the way that one line leads to the next line, how that parallelism works. You'll have a line and then you'll have it followed by a nearly synonymous line, but of increased intensity. It's not an easy form. Try it yourself. You'll find it's incredibly challenging to do it well. Now, one must always keep in mind when reading, especially the poetry of the Old Testament, but I think it's also true in the New Testament as well, that the role of the community is everything. You need to always imagine that this is not poetry of one individual expressing his or her personal feelings, but rather this is a poet who is expressing the feelings of the group. When the Psalms were written, Psalms were always considered a communal form. They were always written to be something that would be sung by the congregation, not sung by an individual. It's nothing like the songs you hear on the radio, which are meant to be very personal, very much the voice of that individual singer. No, Psalms aren't like that. The closest thing, as I have said, to the Psalms would be our hymns. You could sing a hymn by yourself in your closet, and it can be very meaningful, but the hymn writers intended those hymns to be sung by the congregation. They were meant to be theological statements that were spoken by the congregation. So the communal aspect is really crucial. As a matter of fact, I like this quote here from the great translator, the great Hebrew scholar, Robert Alter. He says, the Psalms are not intended to speak for the person, but for the body of persons. A pleading forgiveness is a national plea, and the righteousness or lack thereof of a king is felt by all. When a confession seems personal, notice how it is voiced by a king or a leader. And I want us to look at a few examples, and I want us to pay attention to this. This is not a minor point when we're enjoying Hebrew poetry, when we're enjoying the biblical poetry, that it's always meant to be the congregation. And even when it's a desperate plea for forgiveness, that plea is almost always put into the mouth of a king or a leader. Now, the sons of Korah are some of the great psalms. Here's just a little bit from Psalm 47, which is a wonderful psalm of praise. And it says, "Oh, clap your hands, all you peoples, shout to God with a voice of triumph." Notice, by the way, there you have a line followed by a nearly synonymous line of increased intensity. Clap your hands, all you people. Now we're going to come up a little bit. Shout to the Lord with the voice of triumph. For the Lord Most High is awesome. The next line is a little more intense. He is a great king over all the earth. You can hear the communal quality of this. It's meant to be sung by all the people. Not that long ago, I was in Israel, and I was at the Wailing Wall, the famous Wailing Wall, just as Sabbath was beginning to open on a Friday night. And we were very excited to go. I was always intrigued by the wall. And I always imagined, maybe because it's called the Wailing Wall, that it would be a somber place. But when we got there, people were running to the wall, running as if running to catch the ice cream truck. They were so excited. Now, granted, the women went to one side and the men went to the other, and they would make circles, and they would sing together, and they would dance together, and they were so excited to greet the Sabbath, and they would sing communal songs from the Bible. They would sing songs like Psalm 47. "Oh, clap your hands, all you people, shout to God with a voice of triumph." I got just a little bit of a flavor of maybe what it felt like to hear those songs back in the day of the sons of Korah or in the time of David. They're meant to be communal. When we read poetry in the Bible, always note the communal quality. Here's another one from the sons of Korah, Psalm 46. It says, "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble." Notice, our refuge, our strength. "Therefore we will not fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the sands of the sea." Still very much a communal quality. We hear the voices of all the people singing. But David, who wrote the most of the Psalms that are actually named, his may seem a little more personal, but I want you to notice the change. For example, look at Psalm 51, probably the greatest of the penitent Psalms. It's the psalm that was written after his son, born to him from Bathsheba in sin, dies. And David is, of course, David is devastated. And he says, "Have mercy upon me, O God, according to your loving kindness, according to the multitude of your tender mercies. Blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin." Now, this might actually be the single most personal of all the Psalms, in my opinion. However, even this one, which is so intimate, so personal, it is still communal in presentation because it is the king. The king is speaking. And when a king sins in the Bible, everyone is tainted. Now, we don't feel that way if a president does something wrong, does something illegal. We don't all feel like, oh, now we're all tainted. Even in our families, we don't feel that same sort of guilt that you might see in a Jane Austen novel, where one person, the guilt of one person, taints everyone in the family. We think, boy, he blew it, or she blew it. We think, yeah, that politician blew it. We don't think I blew it. That's how, though, the people in the Bible felt. If the king blew it, we all blew it. So when the king speaks this way, he's speaking for all of us. It's meant to be sung loudly. Now, Asaph may also seem as one of the most personal of the psalm writers, but even his psalms have a difference. And I want to look at Psalm 77, and I'm going to look at verses 1 to 2, and then I'm going to jump over to verse 16. It says, and this sounds like a singular voice, doesn't it? I cried to God with my voice, to God with my voice. Boy, that sounds like one voice, doesn't it? And he gave ear to me. In the day of my trouble, I sought the Lord. My hand was stretched out in the night without ceasing. So we have a single voice singing, but then there's a change in the psalm. All of a sudden, it's as if the psalmist forgot that he was in first person. I don't think so. Actually, this is an antiphonal. So we have a singular voice, and then that would be followed by the group. So then the group would then sing, the waters saw you, O God. The waters saw you, they were afraid. The depths also trembled, and the clouds poured out water. This is kind of like our responsive readings that you'll often find in the back of a hymnal. You'll have the leader who will speak, and then you'll have the group. Except for these would be sung, which I would prefer to the way we often do the responsive readings, which have a kind of creepiness sometimes when you have the person who reads, and it'll have a feeling of like blah, 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 blah. And then the group, we start to read like we've never read before, blah, 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 blah. We need to learn how to sing those, don't you think? We need to learn how to sing those. So unlike David, Asaph, and in some ways the sons of Korah, write what are called antiphonals. You have a leader who will sing some lines, and then the people will sing. But always, 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 there's a communal quality. Even in Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Remember that that's coming from a king. That is the voice of all the people, always. Now, there's a wonderful, maybe it's one of the most beautiful psalms you will ever read. It's not in our Protestant Bible. You'll find it, though, in a Catholic Bible. It's a part of the Apocrypha. And it's called the Prayer of Manasseh. Now, Manasseh may just be the wickedest king that ever ruled in either Israel or Judea. He was a terrible, evil king. And yet there's this beautiful, beautiful psalm of forgiveness, pleading with God for forgiveness. Here's what the prayer of Manasseh says. It says, I have sinned, Lord. I have sinned, and I acknowledge my transgressions. I beg and beseech you, spare me, Lord, spare me. This sounds actually very personal, doesn't it? Even as personal as David's penitent Psalm 51. Destroy me not with my transgressions on my head. Do not be angry with me forever, or store up punishment for me. Now, when I think about this, when I think about Manasseh, it's hard for me to imagine him writing a poem like this that says, do not condemn me to the depths of the earth, for you, Lord, are the God of the penitent. It's hard for me to imagine him saying, you will show your goodness towards me, for unworthy as I am, you will save me in your great mercy. And I shall praise you continually all the days of my life. The whole host of heaven sings your praise, and yours is the glory forever and ever. Amen. What do we know of Manasseh? Well, Manasseh led the people into terrible idolatry. He actually reinstituted down in the valley of Hinnom what Jesus would call Gehenna, which is a little valley just down on the south side of Jerusalem. He reinstituted child sacrifice. Nobody thinks of Manasseh as anything other than a wicked king. When Manasseh is described in the Bible, It says he did evil in the sight of the Lord. So is it possible that he had a moment of clarity and he just spoke and begged for forgiveness? It's possible. I'm not going to discount that. Far more likely, though, is that some psalmist, recognizing that the judgment of God was about to fall, recognizing that the sins of their leader Manasseh were affecting the people in a dreadful way, he wrote a beautiful prayer, a beautiful psalm, a beautiful song pleading for forgiveness. And what better way to speak for all the people than to put this psalm into the voice of the king? Even though it's very unlikely that Manasseh would have ever even had a thought like this, even though he probably never sang this song. But this would be considered not only fitting, this would be considered rather typical of psalmists. When they wanted to write something penitent for all the people, they would put the words into the mouth of a king. Now, one of the things that's interesting about thinking communally is it may actually help us understand not only Old Testament poetry, but it also helps us understand New Testament theology. Because it takes a communal mind to understand what Paul means, because Paul, just like the Old Testament prophets, thinks communally. But notice here when he writes in Romans chapter 5, verse 15, he says, "For if the many died by the trespass of one man," in other words, we all die because one man sinned, and that would be Adam. And that is not unfair in the mind of Paul. That would not seem strange to the ears of people in Bible times. It would make perfect sense that our father, Abraham, by sinning, then affects all of us with that sin, because we are all a part of his family. It's a communal family. So for if the many died by the trespass of the one man, how much more did God's grace and the gift that came by the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, overflow to the many? You see, this is an important theological statement that we believe as Christians and we hold to it. But it's a theology that is built on the communal quality that is apparent throughout the literature of the Bible, throughout the writing of the Bible, throughout the thinking of the Bible. So we all are condemned to die because of one man, but because of the good that one man did, we then have life. That's a beautiful thing. So I'm very grateful for this, and maybe this is why modern people struggle to understand the gospel, because the gospel itself is a communal story, and it's a communal act. And when Jesus died on the cross, he died for all. When he died on the cross, he experienced the sin of all of us. So as we read the Psalms, as we read all of the poetry in the Bible, think in terms of how communal they are. Understand that they're never meant to be private songs. And that doesn't just go for the Psalms. That includes the Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon, which are love poems, very, very, dare I say, erotic poems. How can that possibly be communal? And yet these are meant to be read communally, and they would be read communally. They're meant to show the beauty of a man and a woman, but also to demonstrate how beautiful this is in the context of the community. This is also true of the book of Job. The Job seems like a story that is very personal, but it's meant to be performed. Job is a play. It's meant to be read kind of like a reader's theater. It's meant to be experienced as a communal act. For sure, that includes Lamentations, which is just a terribly sad poem as the writer looks on at the destruction of Jerusalem, and he just wails, and we feel it. It's a communal act. All of the prophets, all of the oracles spoken, notice that they're all written to the peoples themselves as a whole or to the leaders, because they're always meant to be communal. They affect everybody, because that's how the Bible works. The Bible is probably the single most communal book ever written. And when we read the words and experience the lives of many people besides ourselves. So thank you so much.